live stream meeting for 2023. And I'm so excited to have Dr. Samantha Muir with us. I invited her to talk about her research on classical music for the ukulele. And this is being live streamed, and I'll be sharing this on the private Facebook group page, Ukulele Instructors International. This is our 3rd year doing this. Thank you so much. All right, let me pass on this to Samantha, Sam for short, right? Is it okay to call you
yeah.
Sam?
No, Sam, definitely. Yeah.
All right. And thank you all for joining us. We're going to have time afterwards for questions. So if everybody could stay muted and also to kind of recap and get suggestions for next year's topics. So I'm going to pass on this to you, Sam. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thanks, Anne. And hi, everyone. And thank you for inviting me to talk a little bit about my PhD. So we were just having a kind of preliminary chat before the recording started. And so just to recap on that, what I was going to talk about was my reasons for undertaking a PhD on the ukulele. So how I actually came to be doing a PhD on the ukulele. And then maybe look at some of the obstacles and some of the advantages of being the first person to tackle this area of research. And perhaps just touch on how this project has impacted my professional life. So I completed, it was about March this year, and I had some minor corrections to do, which is quite usual. So I wasn't awarded it till about August. I think the whole process takes quite a bit of time. So it's not very, it's not like the distant past. I haven't had a lot of time to do anything except a bit of gardening and other things. So the main thing that really led me to doing a PhD on the ukulele was my curiosity about the ukulele. My background is classical guitar, studied at the Royal College of Music, and I spent many years as a teacher and doing a bit of performing. And I didn't start playing the ukulele until 2012. And it was one of my guitar students who was interested in joining her school's ukulele group. And she asked me if I thought it would be a good idea. And I said, yeah, I think it's a really good idea. And then she said, well, you'll have to teach me, which was, I didn't see that coming. So I felt that I had to at least find out something about the ukulele. And I suppose in the UK, like stereotypically, we see the ukulele as being a strummed instrument, and it's very much associated with George Formby. And that style had never particularly appealed to me. Obviously, as a classical musician, I never really been interested in strumming the guitar. It's not to say that I don't like, pop music and whatever, but that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I was really quite taken aback when I first went into a music shop and picked up it was a soprano ukulele. I didn't even know they came in different sizes. And I just picked up this ukulele and I thought, oh, it sounds amazing. And so I bought it and I didn't know anything about it. So I had to kind of Google it and try and find out some information. But I was really fascinated by the Reentrant tuning, because that was just weird, coming from the guitar that's got linear tuning to suddenly having this high fourth string. It was like, what's going on there? And obviously I knew about the Baroque guitar, which also used Reentrant tunings, but I'd never played a Baroque guitar or been that involved with historical instruments. So that was really interesting to me. The first book I bought was Tony Mizen's The Baroque Ukulele. And it took me a while actually to find that book, because I suppose coming from the classical guitar, I just expected I would Google the ukulele and I would find, all this different music, all these different genres that I could then decide what I wanted to do. And it was literally all strumming and singing. And I didn't want to do that. So I think I spent 3 months playing the arpeggios for Hallelujah, Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, because I thought they sounded really nice. So I was just like every now and then I pick up the ukulele and play these arpeggios, and eventually people in the house were like, well, it's nice, but can you do something else? And then, because good old Amazon must have been listening to me, because it then sent me an email, you know, one of those recommendations you get from Amazon, you might be interested in this. And it was Tony's book, The Baroque Ukulele. So I bought it, and that was like, that really kind of opened the doors for me. Because then Amazon very helpfully suggested Joh King's The Classical Ukulele. And that book's remained, you know, a major inspiration for me. And it was through Joh King that I first, you know, learned about the Campanella style and his Bach CD, which is amazing, and some of the arrangements in the classical ukulele as well. And also at that time, his Nalu music website was available online. And so I read, like, over and over, I think I read his blogs, because he just had some really great information, talking about his own ukulele journey and how he'd come across, you know, arranging in Campanella style, and also the parallels between my journey towards the ukulele and his, because he came from a classical guitar background. So I was quite devastated when I you know, looked him up on the internet and discovered that he'd actually passed away in 2009. Because I was like, oh, I've got to, you know, find this guy and talk to him. So that's the kind of background. And I also, through King, I read the ukulele history, the book by Jim Trancada and Joh King, and that was just, you know, I thought it was just an amazing book. Their research is incredible on the ukulele, and that led me to the machete. And so I started looking into that as well, because I wanted to know, you know, more about that connection with the ukulele. And that led me to Madeira, and I commissioned a ukulele from a maker in Madeira. And I got a nice book of music by Cândido Drummond that had been published. It was really hard to get hold of, actually. It was published in Portugal. And you might know Cândido Drummond was a Madeiran composer, and his handwritten manuscript was, well, rediscovered in the 1990s, but the handwritten manuscript was actually from 1846. And it really changed how people viewed the machete. So obviously it's still used as a folk instrument in Madeira, but this manuscript proved that it had this classical repertoire, and these, you know, wonderful little pieces for machete and guitar. And obviously Joh King knew about this music, and he played some of it. So I was able to, you know, listen to some of his videos, and then I got, as I say, I got a machete, and I got hold of the manuscript and started learning it myself. And the reason for applying to do a PhD was because I had some contact with the University of Surrey. They have what they call the International Guitar Research Centre there, the IGRC. And they put out the call for papers. This is going back to about 2014, I think. And at that time, I was very interested in the works of John Tavener. There's a beautiful piece for guitar called Chant. And so I applied to do a lecture presentation on that piece. And it was accepted, which was quite surprising to me as a then independent researcher. So that was how I got to meet and know the two guys who would become my supervisors, Steve Goss and Milton Mermakides. And I think that's really important if you're considering undertaking academic studies, to know the institution that you're applying to. And if you're doing a PhD and probably a master's, it's probably the same thing. You really need to, you know, research, if you like, your supervisors and make sure that they're going to be really on board with your project, and that they're going to be people that you can work with and basically collaborate with, because it is very much a collaborative process, even though at the end of it, you know, I ended up being the doctor, but they were already doctors, so that's okay. but yeah, so that's how I got my introduction, if you like, to the University of Surrey. And my first presentation there was on, as I say, John Tavner's chant for the guitar. And then the next time the IRGC came around, I was really interested in the machete and the ukulele. So I again applied to do a presentation on the machete. And that was accepted. And so it was just after that that I started talking to them about the possibility of doing a PhD. And it was kind of inspired by there's a guy called Paul Robinson, who was a very fine violinist, and I had just by chance, and well, actually through my interest in John Tavener, I got to meet Paul and his wife, and Paul was very, very sick at the time, and but we became friends for basically the last year of Paul's life, and he actually came to one of my presentations on the machete, and it was like a concert and a talk. And he said, you've got all this knowledge that you're accumulating, and you've got to do something with it, because there's no point in having knowledge unless you share it with other people. And it was kind of like a wake-up call, because I was like madly researching and finding out this stuff, and I hadn't really thought about what I was going to do with it. And I kind of talked to him about the PhD idea, and that seemed like the obvious path for me. So then I started, talking to Steve and Milton, and surprisingly, I think they were really on board with the idea of a PhD on the ukulele. And I think what we all realized, because the driving force behind a PhD is that you've got to make a significant contribution to knowledge. Your work has to be original. And I thought, yeah, that what I want to do ticks both of those boxes. So that's how it started. I suppose the difficulties of being one of the first people to do this kind of research on the ukulele is that once to put it this way, when I first talked to my supervisor, I said, I'm just worried there's enough for a PhD, because, PhD is a really substantial academic work. And he kind of smiled and said, well, you'll be surprised once you start how deep you can go. And of course, that's absolutely what happened. And like 12 months ago, he said, okay, stop researching, stop and start writing up, because you've got enough, and now you just got to write it all up. So once I started, there was just so many things to research, which was great. But one of the problems was that because there wasn't like other researchers that I could reference, so every time I did something, I would have to like go down that rabbit hole to find out, So one of the concerns that we always had was it was quite a wide-ranging portfolio, and because the PhD, you've got to have depth. So we kind of honed it down to be new works for classical ukulele, because it made it very specific with the idea of classical ukulele, even though we were all quite uncomfortable with that term, classical. And I guess in the end, and this actually came up in my PhD viva, the examiner said, there's all the way through your thesis, there's this kind of awkward relationship with the word classical, because you don't want it to be limiting, but you also want to make sure that it's specific to what you're doing. So it would have been really, I don't know, if I just called it new works for ukulele, it would have been really arrogant, I think, because it would have just made this massive assumption that it was just the ukulele, whereas I felt with classical it was very very specific. So the new works, it was actually what we call a practice as research PhD. So it was a portfolio of work which included my own compositions, compositions by others. Choan, I think, is here, or was. And there was a whole bunch of people. I can talk you through them later if you're interested, but also arrangements. And I was fortunate enough to have quite a few of my works published by Productions de Oz, so that really helped, having published works. And then, of course, there were recordings as well of all the new works. So some of them were on YouTube, but I also, last year, I just recorded a digital album, which is available on Spotify, which is called New Works for Classical Ukulele. And I called it Volume 1, because I thought more volumes will surely follow. But there was also written work because of my research into the machete. So there was a couple of papers, one on the British influence in Madeira and the machete, and the fact that the machete was played here in the UK, and then sort of more general papers on classical ukulele. And the other thing that happens with the practices research is that you also have to write like a commentary or thesis. And so my thesis ended up also being about 200 pages. It was quite a significant body of work. So yeah, I think the important thing, I mean, things I say in my abstract, which kind of gives you like the whole overview of the PhD, was that despite the popularity of the ukulele, there's been very little, if any, academic research done on the classical ukulele style. So there's no academic context or foundation for the techniques and repertoires that define classical ukulele. So although, you know, Joh King, for example, made a significant contribution in his arrangements and also in his written work, he never actually wrote about the techniques he used or why he used them or how he used them. So I analysed that in the context of my work and his work and then other composers' work. And another important thing was that while the overall purpose of the research inquiry was forward-looking in its aim of creating new works, it was also backward-looking in my desire to better understand and draw on the instrument's European heritage. So I looked very much at the machete. And so, as I say, the research outcomes in the portfolio were practical, which were scores and recordings, and then theoretical, which were papers and articles, and then a written thesis of about 200 pages, just, you know, discussing everything. And I think pretty much everything's available online. The thesis, I think Anne gave you the link. And it was in two sections, the thesis. So that the first section explores the classical ukulele in theory, and then the second one is the classical ukulele in practice. So the first one includes my research into the Madeiran machete, and I had an article published in a Portuguese journal. So that can also be accessed online, and that really focused on the musical career of Clara Phelps, who was a student of the 19th century Madeiran composer Candido Drummond, who I mentioned a little bit earlier. And I was also commissioned by the regional artistic education faculty of the Madeiran government to make a CD of pieces for the machete and guitar, which we did in, I think it was about 2019. So that went into the portfolio as well. And then the second part is the classical ukulele in theory. So that contains more of a detailed discussion on the classical ukulele style. So if you're interested in the techniques, then, you know, have a look at that. And it particularly looks at guitar techniques and fingerstyle techniques on the ukulele and this historical context for that as well. So I'm just thinking what else could be. I mean, I could go into more depth about my research. I don't know how much you want to hear.
So I was just thinking, for those of us that didn't get to read your entire thesis, it's been on my list, but it's been a long time since I've read an actual thesis. I wanted to just ask if you could lay out, I mean, first of all, the title seems like an oxymoron, new works. Yeah. So you just explained that classical, as in the classical style. Yeah, classical
Yeah.
music, the European, the Western European tradition of what classical music is. So does this encompass only work that's specifically written for the ukulele? So basically not existing work for other instruments, so not transcriptions or arrangements. But then you were saying you look also backward. So like Joh King's interpretations, those are existing work already, but he
Mhm.
played them on the ukulele. If you could explain that so we could kind of see the boundary of your research.
Yeah, okay. So I guess in a way, one of the things I like really wrestled with was defining classical ukulele, because I mean even that is an oxymoron, isn't it? But I really drew on Joh King to explain that. And it's quite interesting because in his book, The Classical Ukulele, he doesn't really justify why he's used this term, although he does mention that the Madeira Machete has a classical repertoire. And in his words, I can't remember the exact quote, but that kind of justifies playing classical music on a small four-stringed instrument. But he really talked about the central thing was the classic, what he called the classic aesthetic. So, and there he's talking about tone production. So although his book, it has, I'm trying to think of some of the pieces, like it's got the Bach pieces, which are fairly obvious, and we all think, oh, well, it's Baroque, but let's call it classical for the want of simplicity. But he's also got quite a lot of traditional tunes. He's got some Hawaiian tunes and some Irish tunes, and I think Sakura is in there, which is a Japanese tune. And you kind of think, wow, how does that fit? He's also got The Entertainer in there. That's a jazz piece by Scott Joplin. So how's he calling this classical? Because these are not classical pieces, but he's actually talking about his arrangement style and the way it's played, and it's a stylistic thing, if you like, and this idea of the way we play it, the way it's written, it's very classical when it comes out of the instrument with this beautiful, if you like, round pure tone. So it's really that he uses it. I think he's slightly ironic in his use of classical ukulele, and I think that's one of the things I always liked about it, because I see sometimes on Facebook groups people get very heated about whether something's classical or not, and I think Joh King was probably a little bit more flexible, and he kind of saw the funny side of it, like, okay, the classical ukulele actually has a jazz piece in there, and people are going to think, what? So I think we use it broadly, but I think that it is stylistic, and it's really to do with that kind of finger picking technique, which is reminiscent of classical guitar, if you like, and the tone production. So that's really important. So in terms of the new works, I think practically, if I did a new arrangement of a piece by Bach, that could be a new work as well. But also, if Choan composes a piece for me that I premiere, that is a new work. Obviously, that's a new contemporary work. So it was quite, again, the term was quite broad, because works also included the written works as well. So it wasn't just about the compositions. It was about written work. So I suppose I chose a title that was quite, yeah, in a way challenging. It sounds simple, but when you break it down, then I guess it's kind of like, well, how specific is it? So, but maybe what I can do, if I can share my screen. Let me see if I can do this without too much. So, okay, so you should be able to see my thesis then, and the contents of it. And so it was a research inquiry rather than specific questions, because practice as research is often more about findings than answering specific questions. So it's not like the sciences, if you like, which would be more specific. A brief definition of classical ukulele, and then methodologies, which we're all very keen on. And the literature review, which is always required for a PhD, that was really tricky because, you know, what was the literature review? And it ended up being an overview pretty much of the existing books and also digital books on what I kind of broadened it to include fingerstyle. So there were even some blues books in there because there was just so little repertoire for the ukulele. Okay, and then these are the papers, the Mashat one, and then I talk about classical approaches to the ukulele from Joh King to Ernest Kaai, and that's really interesting. I'll get back to that in a minute. And then I talk about the different techniques that I used in the compositions and that other composers used as well. So it was difficult to know how to present it. Should I just talk about the piece, each individual piece, which could be a bit messy, or should I just focus on the different techniques I use? And the techniques seemed the most logical. So I talk about the Campanella technique, and that's a pretty hefty chapter. So, you know, if you wanted to cherry pick things to read, then you can use the contents to just, you know, think, oh, it'd be interesting to read about Campanella, and I'd probably recommend that one. And then the Tintinnabuli, which kind of developed from that. But as you can see, there's the kind of standard things that we'd expect: arpeggios, the chord melody approach. Then there was more interesting things like the microtonal ukulele. That was really interesting, and the ukulele and electronics as well. And then there was also didactic material in the portfolio. That was something else that cropped up because initially I was going to present a portfolio of, shall we say, advanced pieces that would be like solo concert works. And at some point I said to my supervisor, you know what, doing my literature review, there's so little available for people to actually learn how to play classical ukulele or fingerstyle ukulele. What is the point of, you know, writing complicated works that the only people who are going to play them are people who've come to the ukulele from a classical guitar or guitar background? So we talked about that, and that's why I then started to produce some didactic material. So it sort of became, if you like, a kind of microcosm of a possible curriculum. So there was the classical ukulele method, and then a couple of books of studies and some repertoire books. So I thought it was really nice that I was able to include some like really basic pieces into the portfolio. We can look at the scores. Maybe that's, it took me ages to learn how to do that index. I was really pleased with it. But so as you can see, like this is page 203. So these are some of the scores. My own scores, these are the published ones. So the variations on the Scottish tune, the Dowie Dens of Yarrow, and then the Falling Rain. These were written quite early on, actually, these advanced pieces. And then I kind of backtracked and started doing the didactic works, the classical ukulele method, the arpeggios, which people kept asking for, and then these two books of studies. They're both progressive, really. And then some traditional tunes for ukulele, and then the more kind of classical repertoire. But again, those are arrangements, but it still all fits into the new works because it's things that hadn't been done before.
I feel like there's a interruption on the internet. Um, is it just me, or do we just lose Sam? I think we just lost Sam. Okay, I'm just waiting for her to come back in. But in the meantime, I just want to take a quick poll. Raise your hand if you're first a classical guitarist, or you've played classical guitar before. Okay, just one. Lindsay, classical guitarist. So just two people are classical guitarists. All right, I suppose I studied classical guitar before. All right, Choan, great. So we got 3 or 4 people. Because one of my questions is to say, in order to play classical ukulele, do you have to have a classical guitar background? And while waiting for Sam to come back in, that's one of the questions. And then the other question is wanting to ask her about all her unpublished work. Does she plan to publish them? And as for the published work, does that mean we can buy them? We can order them? I know she's doing a special offer on her classical method, I think, or is it Carulli? The method of Carulli. I think it was on Facebook or something. And just to get to know more about yourselves, how many of you have read her thesis? Jeff, you're the only one. Lindsay. Okay, Choan. All right.
I helped do it.
You helped her. Okay.
No. I've read half of it. So
Oh, you read half of it. Did you read it before she submitted?
No.
Okay.
I read after it was published, but I've just half read because I really have the time to focus on reading.
Right. Okay. All right. And Jeff, you read the whole thesis? Maybe you could tell us some reaction that you have while I see where she's gone.
I've read less than half, but just that less than half was pretty substantial.
Right.
Work, isn't it?
And how about you, Lindsay, as well?
I kind of quickly skipped read the whole thing, and I'm going to come back to it. So I have gone through it once, but there's so much information there. It's going to take quite a while to absorb it all, really.
Right. Well, I'm really excited because for me, the most important section is 2.13 on didactic methods, because my students are always asking me, how do you produce a nice sound? Now, I know tone production in classical guitar is like one of the most important things, right? Next to fingering. And I'm just wondering, is this a topic that you come across when you're teaching with your ukulele students? Questions about how do you produce a good tone? I mean, it's quite a big step to get to even realize that, hey, I want to sound good. Sam, are you back?
I'm back. I think I'm back. Yeah, I'm back. Sorry about that.
Okay, we're just covering, I mean, all of this is being recorded. I was just saying how thank you for including a section on didactic material for classical ukulele, because one of the questions we have is, do you have to have classical guitar background, the foundation, before you could even attempt to produce a good tone on the ukulele, or are there shortcut methods? And another question I have is this exclusive to instrumental ukulele, fingerstyle ukulele playing, your research? Uh-oh. I think she's frozen again. So this is what happens when we're in Zoom. So those are some of the questions I pose. Is exclusive to instrumental. I mean, I've heard people accompany themselves beautifully singing with really nice finger picking accompaniment. And of course, there's opera. That's considered classical music, is it not? Yeah. Just trying to steer the boundary. And let me just ask you, how do you teach good tone production? I know, Jeff, you've written etudes for this.
Well, it always starts with getting the student to listen to themselves and sort of think critically about that. How do I sound? Even to the point where I get students to record themselves and or videotape themselves, watch themselves in a mirror when they're practicing, etc. It's not enough for me to say, oh, that's a little thin. That sound is a little thin, or you're playing too close to the neck. That's not the big, fat, mellow sound we want for this piece. We need a more brittle sound. It's not enough for me to describe it with words or tell them they're doing something wrong. I think for them to listen and to learn to critically listen to music is essential. And that's a very difficult thing to explain to somebody. They just have to do it by practicing it. I can't tell somebody how to critically listen. And I think that's very difficult in this day and age. I think it's a lost art for a lot of people to intently focus on listening to a piece of music that someone else is playing or that you're playing. People are very short attention span these days, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge, but it can be done. It absolutely can be done. You just have to know how to point them in the right direction.
Right. Well, thank you. And I'm going to ask Lindsay as well. When you teach ukulele students, how do you get them to produce a good tone?
Well, I was agreeing with quite a lot of what Jeff said, because particularly because I teach quite young students, they're not going to, until they understand, until they can have an internal picture of what good tone is, they're not going to be able to produce it anyway. And a lot of the early stages, it's about just mastering the mechanics of the instrument. Going off slightly on a tangent, what I thought was interesting about the whole classical definition was I think a lot of it is about actually understanding the classical tradition and how your pieces relate to classical tradition. Because if you don't understand what a concerto is, you're going to have a heck of a job actually performing one. And I think for me, the whole classical ukulele is how it relates to the classical music tradition, because it has all these other traditions, you know, like Andy Eastwood thinks suggests the George Formby tradition is a unique tradition of its own. So until players are coming along and they're understanding classical music from inside, then they're not going to produce classical music because it won't relate to the tradition.
Thanks, Lindsay. I think that's a really good way to bring Sam back. Sam, is your
Sorry about that.
That's all right. No, we had such a big discussion, lots of questions, which, is there a shortcut to playing well? The classical ukulele, 1, classical guitar background, 2, awareness of classical style, and having a classical music background. I mean, I'm a pianist, so I know what classical music is. But somebody who's had no background whatsoever, say, get thrown into the ukulele clubs that are just growing everywhere in the world, so used to strumming, and then one day they're listening to someone playing solo ukulele, maybe yourself, on YouTube, and go, oh my gosh, I didn't know you could create such a beautiful sound like that. I've been playing ukulele for a decade and I've never produced that sound. What will you say to this person?
Yeah, I get a lot of people have said that to me. It's like one of the most common things that people say. I think the important thing, I think this I just came in at the end of Lindsay's, what he was saying, and I agree with it. But the really important thing, and this comes back to the didactic material that we were talking about just before I got zapped, is to have repertoire that is accessible for people at even a beginning level. You can play Ode to Joy, and you can play Suagan, and even When the Saints Go Marching In. I know it's not a classical piece, but they're the kind of pieces that are used a lot in classical guitar methods. and so you can introduce people to the idea of playing melody, and then as they progress to, you know, adding other parts and chords to it. I think that's important. I think one of the things that's really interesting, and I guess this is following on from doing my PhD, because I realized that I was just going to keep going, keep researching, keep, you know, composing and keep arranging. And my most recent project has been to arrange. I love Carulli. I think Carulli sounds great on the ukulele, and I always get a really good response from people. So I've been arranging his opus 241, which is a complete method by Carulli. And I decided, well, actually, you know, since he's like one of the greats and his method's been around in the guitar world for like 200 years, it was first published about 1810, why not just like use that as a basis and a model for a method for the ukulele? And so that's basically what I've done, and it just came out last week with, so it's got exercises based on Carulli's exercises, scales and arpeggios, and then it's got pieces, progressive pieces, and some of them are quite simple. And people like on my Patreon are like, oh, this is great because we love Carulli and I can play this. I think that's really important, the idea that I can play this, you know. There's a piece that was just published in Uke magazine here, and again, it's another piece by Carulli, the Moderato, and it sounds beautiful. I mean, it's one of the first things I arranged, and I always play this piece because it's just really, it's a simple arpeggio, you know, D minor, and then some A, and it's got, you know, lovely chords, and people are like, oh, I can play that. You know, I can play classical ukulele because I can play things that are achievable. They can go to the internet and they can, you know, they can listen to me or other classical players playing things and say, okay, so this is what we're aiming for, this sound, this you know, this beautiful sound that you can get from the ukulele. I don't have to just thrash it. And so I think it just goes from there. I think one of the things I noted on Joh King's website when it was up was that he said that people loved his playing when he went around to some festivals. They thought it was great. They loved what he did. And he tried to do some workshops, but he said people didn't particularly want to play it. And I thought about that, and I thought, yeah, because, you know, Campanella is really hard, and to play Bach, you know, a Bach Campanella piece is just, it blows my brain. It's just way too hard. You've got to have, you know, beginner material, instructional material. It's what we need, and it's what a lot of people have been doing now, you know, creating material that is achievable. I think that's going to really lay the foundation. You know, Choan's got some great books. I know Jeff's done a book. Lindsay's, you know, got material, and people like David John Roach, and then more. Daniel Ward has got some great material as well. The more material we have, Elizabeth Pfeiffer, she's got some great stuff. It's from seeing all these people. You know, the more material we have and the more accessible material we have, it's, you know, it's opening doors because people will hear it and they'll hear other people playing it, and it goes from there. So, you know, I think that's the important thing, is to have, and this kind of goes back to my PhD, is what I said to my supervisor. I think it's really important to have this didactic material because, you know, because he's like, that's not PhD level. And I went, stop thinking like a guitarist. This is the ukulele. And he's like, oh, okay. So he says, okay, as long as you can justify it, it's fine. And yeah.
So I have a burning question, and that is reentrant tuning. That's what the ukulele was initially. Of course, earlier, there were all sorts of other tunings, and I know Choan just came out with a new book on alternate tunings. How do you feel about, I mean, what do you have to say about whether the true way would be the high G ukulele, or whether it's okay, low G, and even alternate tuning, as long as it advances the frontier of music?
I think it's all okay, but the original tuning is the reentrant tuning because it comes from the rajau, from another Madeiran instrument, and that is the original tuning. I'll go into that in my thesis as well because it's it's quite important because a few people say, you know, it's this tuning or that tuning, but no, it's definitely the Reentrant C6 tuning is the original. I don't have a problem with low G tuning. I mean, I've kind of used it myself, although I have a 5-string, so it has octaves. So I suppose that's kind of hedging my bets. And at the moment, I've just strung one of my ukuleles in 5th tuning because I was like, oh, that's interesting. I want to try that. I think it's fine, but there's something that worries me though is that the more guitarists who come to the ukulele, the more seems to be, and I could be, I mean, you know, tell me if I'm wrong, the more push there is towards the low G. Does anybody else? Yeah, there's a few people shaking their heads. Nobody's going to say anything.
Well, no, I just want to say, so my husband is a classical guitarist, and he says you have to play high G ukulele, otherwise you're just cheating, you know.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think I mean, high G is the sound, isn't it? It's the original authentic sound. Like I say, I'm fine with low G, and I even have a baritone. Having said, you know, I'm never going to get a baritone. What did I do about, I don't know, 6 or 7 weeks ago? I saw this secondhand baritone sitting on this table at a ukulele festival. And someone said, "Oh, go and try it." And I was like, oh, okay, you know. I was like, oh, actually, it's really nice. So I bought it. Then I have a baritone. But no, I think that's part of the fun of the ukulele is that they're affordable instruments. So we can have, you know, all these different tunings. But for me, you know, the heart and soul is always going to be the Reentrant, definitely.
I feel like you've opened this big sort of invitation for researchers to go into you know, extensions of ukulele, like different kind, like the banjolele, for example, you know,
Yeah,
high
absolutely.
G versus low G, different tunings, and you know, guitar-shaped objects. Where do you see research being the most ripe going forward?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think there's plenty of room for research on the ukulele. I think that I don't really know where it's going to go. I mean, it will go where it wants to go. It was one of the things that I ended up realizing, you know, at some point you kind of step back and you think, actually, you know, it's my PhD, but it's totally not about me. It's all about the ukulele, you know, and the instrument is kind of going to go where it wants to go and do what it wants to do. And sometimes I felt like it was the instrument that was, you know, leading me rather than me trying to lead it somewhere. That was quite interesting. And I think that the more possibilities there are, like, yeah, the banjolele, the different tunings, you know, there's so many places that we can go. We don't want to limit ourselves. I also love that the ukulele is such a community instrument. I was in Australia a couple of months ago, and I met loads of people and did quite a lot of workshops and things. And I loved that the festivals have, and it's the same here in the UK and probably everywhere, that when you go to a festival, it's not like a classical guitar festival. You know, you have everything. You have like jazz and blues and just, you know, there's just so many different styles, and there's people improvising and people jamming over there, and I think that's really exciting because it's so much better than the classical music scene, which is kind of really stuffy and snooty. And I love that with the ukulele, so many people get up and perform. Doesn't matter if they're not, you know, like virtuosos. They just want to get up and do their song or whatever. And the ukulele scene is really open to that and encouraging. I think that's really important. So maybe there's like areas of research into that, just the kind of the ukulele vibe and how special it is.
Thank you. I don't know whether you're done with your presentation, but I know there's a lot of burning questions. Do you want to tell us what else you're going to because you got cut off earlier. So I don't want to
yeah, no, I don't think there was that much more to say. I mean, I could go on. I mean, it's so much of it. The only thing I did want to say just quickly, because I mentioned Ernest Kaai, who was the like the first virtuoso of the ukulele, the first Hawaiian virtuoso, and he wrote the first method in 1910. But what I think's really cool, I'm sure most of you know this anyway, because I'm just going to share my screen again. So, okay, so this is his. So can you see this piece, Haere, which is actually from his 1916 method? And you can just see, just by looking at it, that his approach is really kind of classical. You know, it could be a classical piece. So although there's like a lot of strumming and fancy strokes in the book, he also has these beautiful little pieces. Again, a waltz. So it's kind of reminiscent of the Candido Drummond repertoire. And so I don't want to like go on about that, but I think the important. Oh, sorry, were you playing it? I just cut it off. I'll put it back. You can play it. I'll put it back up and talk. There you go. It's really lovely. So it's quite simple in structure, but he has this kind of Campanella thing going on by using the open G, the Reentrant tuning. And then, you know, it's heading towards C major, and it's all really nicely structured. And it's just a great little piece. People love it. Did some workshops on this, and people are like, oh, I can play this. And it's like this historical ukulele repertoire, because it's from 1916. But I think the take home there, and the thing that I got kind of excited about with the PhD, was that classical ukulele isn't a new idea. You know, it's just a continuation of, you know, how the ukulele was first perceived as an instrument that you could strum and use to accompany the human voice, or, you know, play with guitars and other instruments, or you could play these little, you know, really charming little solo pieces as well. And his approach was fingerstyle, because somewhere, I'm not sure where it is, but he mentions that you should use the thumb and index and middle fingers. He doesn't indicate how to do the chords. I would imagine that they were probably strummed, probably quite a light thumb, kind of a thumb roll, rather than a. But yeah, I think that's important to remember. If you mastered it, Anne, I can send you the score.
Yes, speaking of the score, I would love to look at that. I mean, I love exploring new music. I saw on Facebook that you're offering one of your publications this weekend. Is that right? For those that are not Patreon, your Patreon.
That was last weekend. Yeah.
That was last week and I missed it. Do you think you could re-offer it to instructors?
Yeah, I could. It's actually it's up. It's available for everyone. Last weekend I just did a special offer for Christmas for my patrons who supported me. But yeah, so now it's just publicly available. There's probably a link somewhere on my site. I can probably, let me see. So there's a few videos on YouTube. I haven't finished. Oh, actually, I'm not going to do the internet because it's really slow. You'll have to look it up. If you go to my Sam Muir ukulele YouTube channel, and then you look at my most recent video, I think it's number 7 from Opus 241, and then there's a link.
Okay.
There.
I was reading something about, was it the Carulli book 1, or was it the Carulli method, or something that you were
offering? It was his complete. So it's this project that I've got on the go at the moment, and because Carulli's always been like really popular, and I really like his stuff. So I'm basically arranging his and adapting his complete method, Opus 241, for the ukulele. So I've done all like the written material at the beginning, which is about, I think the whole thing's about 72 pages. So hence I called it volume 1, because I thought, well, it's going to take a while. So there's like exercises, scales and arpeggios, and also there's 10 pieces, 10 really nice pieces.
Is there a volume 2 that you're planning on? You're working on a volume 2.
Yeah. I've done a couple of the arrangements. So I think, I mean, I'll see how far I get with it. I think by the end of his method, they're quite difficult. So I'll have to see if I think they're going to work. But definitely the early pieces work really nicely on ukulele. So I think I'll just see, because I find that there's certain pieces like, well, Capriccio Arabe, which is one of my favorite guitar pieces, it doesn't work for me on the ukulele. I kind of just miss the bass. There's too many really lush bass notes that are not there. Yeah, I kind of like to play the pieces and think, does it sound good, rather than just saying, oh, I could do this, because it's a kind of neat thing to do. So yeah, I'll see what I think is going to work nicely on the uke.
Thanks. So I've got a question from Kelly in the chat, and maybe this is a good time for everyone to write down their questions so I could ask Sam. And Sam, you could answer or not answer, but I know Kelly just finished her master's degree, and I guess she's thinking about doing a PhD. That's why she's asking how the journey of PhD studies affected your personal life. And was it because of the lockdown? Actually, you started the PhD before the lockdown.
I did, yeah. I started before. I mean, it changed shape because I had plans to go to Hawaii and do some research there. And then, of course, that couldn't happen. So that's when I had to kind of hone it into more of a, like, focusing on the European angle, because I could obviously do that from home. And also it was really interesting in terms of composing, because it led me to Arvo Pärt and the Tintinnabuli style, and it was during lockdown that, you know, I really needed his music. I don't know if you know his music well, but it's just so kind of meditative and beautiful, and just creates this really lovely space to be in. So I was listening to all this Tintinnabuli stuff because it put me in a good place. And I thought, I wonder if you could do that on the ukulele. So it really kind of, yeah, it helped me in that way. But because lockdown was just so weird for all of us, wasn't it? But yeah, so I had to change the shape of it. But I think ultimately it was, you know, it was stronger because of it. Well, there's quite a lot of things in we're talking about the baritone. Absolutely, it's a legitimate instrument, and it's beautiful to play Renaissance guitar music on. I mean, you can play Renaissance guitar music on a ukulele with low G, but the baritone's probably closer in tuning. I think Christopher Page, who's like a big expert on the Renaissance 4-course guitar, I think he kind of likens it to a baritone in one of his lectures, which is interesting. How does one deal with the lack of bass notes on the ukulele? Well, Campanella. Yeah, I think Campanella, because it's you know, driven by the melody, and you use the melody to create these like little consonances and dissonances. You've got this overringing, and so I think that's for me, I think, why I'm so attracted to the high G, because I don't feel like I need the bass. Choan. Oh, okay, that's fine.
We should just say for people who aren't in our Zoom. So Choan has come up with the alternate tuning, which I ordered and I've not looked at yet. But what did he say? Doesn't care how anyone tunes the ukulele, but they're instruments to make music. So, I mean, I see that as a new pot, you know, like just ripe for new compositions. If you could tune your ukulele in so many different ways. And even for beginners, because beginners are so focused on making sure their ukuleles are tuned. But what if they started their journey and their teacher says, why don't you tune it a different way so you could play Choan's new composition? I mean, why not? Right? Is that
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I that was a thing that came up from lockdown for me. Over lockdown, because I wasn't performing, I was experimenting more with different alternate tunings. I think Choan used one of the tunings that I originally used for one of his pieces, and it was like, oh, cool, because actually if I performed it, there'd be two pieces now instead of just one. So I did a whole kind of suite, which I called Lines of Flight, it was 4 pieces, and they all had these kind of really weird tunings in the end. But I thought it was just, it worked really nicely. It was really interesting.
Did you talk about skill levels, kind of labeling the grades? Because I know that, unless guided by a teacher, those that are self-taught or those that want to explore music, it's very frustrating to get music that's too difficult, if one doesn't know how to simplify it. Do you talk about different levels?
No, I find it really, I've done a lot of workshops now, and it's always really difficult to pitch like fingerstyle classical ukulele workshops because it's really difficult for people to gauge their own level because we don't kind of have those tools in place. It's like if you've done the piano, you can say, oh, I've done grade 3 or I've done grade 6 or whatever. And I know there are ukulele grades out there, but we're not so driven by that. And also a lot of people might be quite advanced at strumming chords, but not familiar with finger picking. That could be quite a big problem, because I've done a workshop for a group and I was told in no uncertain terms they were all advanced, and actually about half of them couldn't read tablature, so that was tricky. So yeah, in terms of level, I find it really difficult, and I know a lot of people are quite into creating graded music at the moment, but I don't really understand how that works. People can either do it or they're not, or they can't. Do you know what I mean? It's like if I get a student come to me and it's like, well, they're a complete beginner, so I know they can't do anything, and they might say, oh, I can play a little bit, or oh, play me something, and then they play me something and I can see what their level is, and then I'm gonna give them something appropriate.
I think it's always the case if you have a group class, you have people at different levels. You can never get everybody the same level. And then if they're adults, how do you politely, not offend anybody, but still try to be inclusive?
Yeah, you can be, definitely, because you can, you pitch, you've got your material, and you're kind of trying to pitch it to the kind of mid level, if you like. So I try not to have too big a group, although sometimes they are very big groups, and then it's much harder. But if you've got, say, 20 people or less, then it's more manageable, because you can look. Obviously don't want to make people like conscious that you're watching them, but you can, in your peripheral vision or whatever, you can be aware of how everybody's getting on and interacting with the music. And just by going slowly and just I tend to just do 4 bars at a time. It's like, okay, we're just going to do the first line, and it's the first phrase piece, and that's what we're going to do. And when we get to the end of it, we're going to stop and have a chat about it. And people seem to appreciate that slow, considered approach. And I say, I know some of you can do this and can probably play the whole piece, but actually this is a really good way of practicing, by chunking and just doing 4 bars and stopping and thinking about it, and then maybe repeating it 3 or 4 times. And then, and you can talk to the people in the class, and you can get feedback from them. You say, okay, so would you like to repeat that or go on? And then they start to work together as well. You know, and I've had some people say this is way too hard for me, but I'm really enjoying it because I know I'm going to take it home and I'm going to study it. So I just like to, you know, kind of watch rather than really participate, but I'm really happy, you know, with what's happening. So you can make it inclusive for everybody. You don't, yeah, and you can make people work together and help each other just by going slowly and talking to them, I find.
So thank you. And I noticed Jeff posed a question that I've seen on Facebook that you've asked for feedback on, basically different ways, or what is the best way to notate polyphonic music with multiple voices on the ukulele, stems down or for lower notes like guitar. And I guess the other question is, I know some like Choan, I think you do, and Lindsay, you do numbers, but you don't have stems. Is that right? Sometimes I see those with stems. All the stems are in the notation. So the numbers without the stems are in the tablature. And or if you put too much information, it's overcrowded. Did you get a sort of conclusion about your survey, Sam, you could share with us?
Yeah, I didn't. The only conclusion was that everybody has a different opinion. And the guitar, interesting that people have more of a guitar background wanted less, which stands to reason, because if you studied the guitar, you would have like come up through the guitar tutors and you would have progressed, and a lot of what the material will be kind of inbuilt into you. It would be intuitive or implicit, if you like, particularly in the tablature. Whereas people who are like perhaps playing the Carulli piece, they might want more help with the picking hand or with the fretting hand. But what I decided was to keep the tab clean. I actually like to use rhythm in the tab as well. That's also, some people don't like to do that, but I like to have the rhythm stems in the tab. I don't use the voicing. The voicing is really difficult with the Reentrant tuning, actually, and it can look really stupid, I think. So for the Carulli, I didn't bother with it, to be honest. Because I thought it looked stupid trying to write the voices and just really confusing. But I did include a lot of picking hand fingering and quite a bit of fretting hand, although I kept that connected to the notation. And I decided not to use the string indicators that we use with guitar. So I didn't use the numbers in the circles, because some people said they liked it. I quite like it if I'm, I can just read from the notation with that. But then I sat back and looked at it and I thought, yeah, it's just like way too much information. And if you've got the tablature, you don't actually need it. You can just refer down to the tab. So yeah, I settled on a clean tab line, and then the picking hand fingering just below the notation, and the fretting hand fingering with the notation as you would have in the guitar. So it was there if people wanted to refer to it.
What about adding like chord names or chord diagrams above?
Yeah, that's a sticky one, isn't it? A few people asked for that, and I thought, well, I did it in the Uke magazine because it was particularly asking about chord progressions, but I don't know. I mean, then it's an awful lot of information, isn't it? Because if you've got your tab line and your notation line, do you need a chord box as well? And does that just confuse people? Because some people have said, well, how do I play the chord and then play, what's in the tab line? It's like, well, you don't, I don't know. I mean, maybe other people have got views on that or experience of dealing with that. But I just decided that, generally speaking, that's just way too much information.
Well, I'm all for getting my students to read quickly. And sometimes it's faster for them to see this picture chord diagram than to read the individual strings. So maybe that's cheating. Let's see if we have any more questions. Did we answer all the questions? I think Kelly wanted I think there's some kind of summary about what your
Yeah,
You're
I retype my question. Can have a
Ah,
look.
yeah. Okay, I can see it. So it's Dr. Sam's PhD is classical ukulele. So the contents are divided into classical ukulele as an instrument, classical ukulele techniques, and classical ukulele pieces. How did Sam look for the literature reviews to support what reference material? Yeah, that was tricky. And what academic material? Yeah, so the well, my literature review is actually available. You can see it on my if you go to my I Love Classical Ukulele site and you look at, I think it's under resources, and then I've got like a really comprehensive catalogue of all the books that well, there's probably more now that I could add to it, but I basically, because I wanted to create, didactic material and different learning resources, I kind of just compiled all the books on fingerstyle and classical that I could find, because obviously there's very little other material to source. Obviously Joh King and Jim Trancada's book, The Classical Ukulele, that was an important one. And I have got a bibliography actually on the Thesis. If you download it, it's quite a comprehensive bibliography.
Thank you, because maybe it helps me for my preparation of my journey of my PhD next year.
Yeah.
Because,
okay.
yeah, the classical ukulele, I think I want to touch more on the rhythm. My understanding is the classical, because I come from the piano background. I don't have guitar knowledge. So classical music to me is more like very straightforward rhythm, in the 1, 2, 3, 4. But so the classical rhythm, how should I evolve from the basic rhythm into like the jazz piece? Is that under classical music, classical ukulele in that sense?
I don't know. I mean, is classical music really strict in rhythm? I think that there's quite a lot of rubato. I was talking about this earlier, like talking about a Bach piece and thinking of the Bach prelude from the first cello suite, and like listening to cellists play that, they use a lot of rubato. It's not, it's not a really strict rhythm. So I don't know how to answer that really. I think it needs to have, the music needs to have rubato, doesn't it? In it, otherwise it's just going to sound very metronomic.
I just worry maybe I will get queried by my professor. You talk about classical ukulele. To them, classical music is like kind of very classical pieces. And then why your pieces presented is like, modern pieces, like jazz and very
I think
rhythm.
I think if you think of it more as like a style, classical ukulele style. So I think the problem by saying classical ukulele is, we say use the term classical, then you just immediately think, I suppose, of Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven. But like I said, the classical ukulele, it's more style, it's more a way of playing the instrument, the touch, and the kind of classical aesthetic, the actual tone production and the sound. So maybe from that angle.
Okay, so that means your PhD's thesis is more on the ukulele classical ukulele style, the different kind of styles.
Yeah, exactly, and the techniques that I use.
And the techniques. All right. Thank you, Dr. Sam.
Okay.
Well, are there any other questions? Did everybody get to ask something?
I just show you quickly, because I just found out my alternate tunings. This was the different tunings that I used.
Fantastic.
So this was a Tintinnabuli piece, Holloway. It was kind of based on Ferrolina by Arvo Pärt. So that was my first one, which was, it's a really easy one that we can all use just by dropping the E string down to E flat, and then it sort of changes the whole character of the ukulele from being happy to being sad. And then this one is I used on my 5-string tenor, so it's the 5th string. Sorry, the 4th course, if you like, is tuned in octaves. And then I think that was the one that Choan liked, the Red Angel. That was kind of wild. And this one also I found really effective, the Falling Rain tuning. So yeah, I just thought I'd give you an overview. I like this one as well, with the tuning the 4th string to F. And that's quite a simple one. I mean, some of these were quite major, but this one was quite a simple one.
Did you come up with these names and these tunings?
Yeah, so these are the names of the pieces that I used them in. So Whistlepipe Gully was a piece I wrote after being in Australia, and I used this tuning. And then this was a piece. They were all pieces that, well, obviously Faralina was an arrangement, but all of the other ones were my own compositions.
So when you talk about alternate tunings, that's is there a limit for each string, how high or low they go before it sort of doesn't work anymore?
If you go too high, you snap, they break. I did that the other day. It's like, I don't know why I did that. I knew that was going to happen. But you know, it's just like testing the boundaries, if you like. And then low, it just sounds, you know, if it's too low, it just sounds like a rubber band. But it's just experimentation.
Right. Well, that was great. Now, raise your hand if it makes you want to read Sam's thesis right away. I can't wait to read it. Thank you so much.
Oh, wow. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad that you're able to come and share all this and we could ask you questions. Did anybody have a question, burning question to ask before we go to sort of, you know, chatting and talk about what we want to do next year? Lan, you have a question, a burning question? All right.
Burning is probably an exaggeration. I'm just interested in the boundaries of what this little instrument can do, and to hear people who want to play rock and roll on it, and blues, and people who want to play classic, and every other flavor in between, and you want to play Japanese music. It's all possible because, as Choan was saying, it's just an instrument. It just plays notes, and you can adapt it to be what you want it to be. And I agree with Sam that the irony of talking about classic curriculum, classic repertoire, to include everything from Bach to Scott Joplin, it's classical in one sense. And the idea that you have classical, if you talk about classical Hawaiian music, you're using the word classical in a different way. It's totally a different approach. And so I will stick my finger in the socket. High G and low G is indeed a matter of preference. And there's certain music that sounds much better in high G, and certain that sounds almost impossible to play in high G, and low G makes it possible. It is the musical part of a standard guitar minus the bass strings. I just have a bass player play with me and let them play the bass line for me. But what I teach in my classes is that the three reasons why low G, why high G, and one, why you would want to have a ukulele with high G. First of all, it is traditional Hawaiian sound. So if you're going to play Hawaiian beach music and you want it to sound like the records, you really have to play high G. There's no doubt about it. The second reason is that, as I think, and Sam is certainly much more expert than I am on it, the ukulele, as developed in Hawaii, was a merger of the machete and the rejao, which had, I think, a high drone string on it. So when they merged them together, they included aspects of both. So that was a holdover from the heritage of the Portuguese wood carvers, wood makers, cabinet makers. But the third reason, which I think is the most telling of all, is that before the ukulele, the people of Hawaii, not the wealthy white and Asian millionaires who came and stole the country from them, but the actual Hawaiian, native indigenous Hawaiian people had no melody instruments. All they had were things they banged on and things they shook and masked women's voices. The women did the singing and the men played the percussion instruments. With the ukulele, all of a sudden they had a melody instrument, and the range from the C to the A on a ukulele, standard tuning ukulele, is pretty much the range of a woman's voice. So if you play a ukulele with a high G, which the high G is between the E and the A, it provides something that blends better with the women's voices. And so that, I was told by Hawaiian that was the reason why they favor, for Hawaiian music, they favor that because it was meant to be sung with women singing. And the guitar, yes, answer to something just popped up. Yes, the guitar was there, but not with native Hawaiians. They couldn't afford one. They were expensive. They were difficult. Who was going to teach them? And the Howleys who came, they had harps and pianos and bassoons and oboes, but not the natives. So the popularity of the ukulele came because it was something that was cheap, easy to learn, and it could be adapted to the music of the people. So that's what I teach. If there's more to it than that, I would love to have, more background on why. So that's it. Thank you very much, Sam. It was very interesting, and I'm looking forward to reading your paper.
Thank you. Yeah, well, there's another area of study right there, isn't there?
Well, Dr. Muir, thank you very much.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, we're going to go on. We have 5 minutes left. Talk about what we want to do next year. I like the idea of having topics beforehand and inviting speakers. I noticed that just looking at the number of views, we got the highest number of views on the topic of improvisation, which Lindsay gave. And I'm just wondering whether today's talk will beat that because nothing's going to happen until January, whatever, the third week. And we've certainly had a lot of interest in this topic. Anybody want to say anything? Well, for me, I'm grateful that Sam has got the I Love Ukulele website because, looking for music, is this along the lines of classical ukulele, this website? Is it a place where you try to be comprehensive to list all the music that's written, or how does it serve this website?
Well, basically, it's my website, so it just talks about my work and lists my work. But if the thing that, oops, I just grab the link and put it in the chat. I think the thing that could be helpful for people is this list of publications which I compiled. There, I've also got a blog which I haven't done that much on lately. But yeah, I think that was my kind of literature review, if you like. And my plan is to just keep updating that. I need to update it. It's not up to date at the moment, but it's quite, as you can see, it's quite comprehensive. And I think what was really interesting is if you look at the dates, which is what I did for the PhD, things really kind of took off after 2017. The dramatic, I've got a table somewhere in the PhD, but the really dramatic increase in the number of ukulele, fingerstyle publications, which is great. I think it's really promising.
Well, I thank you for that, Sam. I'm going to propose that we choose the third Saturday in January 2024, a sort of from now until then to have time to think about what sort of topics we're interested in. I know I have my own list. And then we could, have a tapas style or dim sum like style of meeting where we could all contribute. And Sam, have you been to Hawaii yet?
No, not yet. I haven't made it there yet.
When I lived on Maui, I was there for 6 years, and I was so disappointed that the number of people that actually came to Hawaii to visit me, I could count on either one hand or barely two hands. And I know why, because those of my friends at that time, my musician friends, they were in Europe. And it would take them, at least a whole day to cross an ocean, cross the continent, cross another ocean to get there. So if you were to go there, you have to stay for a month. I mean, a week is not enough because you'll have to get over your jet lag. Yeah, both ways. And I'm thinking that it's paramount that you grab stuff from your thesis, publish it widely so that you will have to go to Hawaii to defend your thesis again.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah.
And I'm talking because I'm such a classical music fanatic that I refuse to buy a ukulele or touch one until I knew I was leaving. The last 6 months, I finally got one from Daniel Ho because he was such a good salesperson. He said, "You got to try my tiny tenor. I'll get it."
Great. I've got one.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
beautiful.
I know you have one. He said, for your first instrument, you should spend the money and buy the best one there is. Unlike all this other advice I've been given, my students tell their friends, just get a cheap one. I said, no, buy the most expensive one.
Yeah, it's good advice. Yeah.
Right, right. I mean, otherwise I probably wouldn't play the ukulele. And even living next to a ukulele builder. And, so for me, that was my souvenir. And look what happened. I'm stuck with the ukulele. That's all I did after I left Hawaii. Nothing but the ukulele. So, yeah. So, on that note, I want to thank everyone for coming to this final meetup. And I'm going to have this, I'll leave it on unlisted for 2 months. And the link still works for the YouTube video. And please share it, share Dr. Muir's thesis, spread the word that the ukulele can sound very beautiful. I know that Daniel Ho said to me that, with your background in classical music, people will take you seriously. So take this tiny tenor ukulele and evangelize so they can hear how beautiful the ukulele can sound by itself. So thank you so much for doing your research on this and sharing this with the world.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm